Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Shadow Archives. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and slowly fall asleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's begin. When I was younger, my cousins used to take me with them to the skate park late at night. I was the youngest one in the group, and they were all older, louder, and a lot more confident than I was. To me, those nights felt like little adventures. The skate park was usually empty after dark, just concrete ramps, metal rails, and the sound of wheels echoing in the quiet. The park sat in a low area, and up on a small hill behind it was a public restroom building. It was old, made of concrete, and always felt out of place, like it didn't belong anywhere people were supposed to have fun. That night didn't feel any different at first. The air was cool, the sky was dark, and the park lights cast long shadows across the ground. My cousins were skating, laughing, and messing around like they always did. I remember standing off to the side, watching them, trying to act older than I was. After a while, I realized I really needed to use the bathroom. I didn't want to say anything at first, because I hated walking up there alone, but eventually I had no choice. The restroom was a short walk uphill, but it felt longer every time. There were no lights along the path, just the faint glow from the park below. The building itself always gave me a bad feeling. It was one of those restrooms where the lights don't turn on right away. You step inside, and for a few seconds, everything stays dark until the motion sensor kicks in. I remember pushing the door open and being swallowed by darkness for a moment. The smell hit me immediately, strong and sour, the kind of smell that tells you a place hasn't been cleaned in a long time. As my eyes adjusted, and before the lights fully came on, I could see the floor near the stalls. There were dark brown stains smeared across the concrete. They looked old and dried, like they had been there for a while. At the time, my brain didn't jump to anything extreme. There were a lot of homeless people who passed through the area, and the restroom was known for being gross. I remember thinking it was just human waste, something disgusting but not surprising. I felt annoyed more than scared, telling myself it was nasty but that I just needed to hurry and get it over with. The lights finally flickered on, buzzing softly overhead. The room looked even worse in full light. The stalls were scratched up, the walls covered in old graffiti, and the floor looked like it hadn't been washed in years. I walked toward the stalls, trying not to look too closely at anything. I chose the last stall, the one farthest from the door, because that was my habit. I thought it might be a little cleaner, or at least more private. When I opened the stall door, I noticed a grocery bag sitting on the floor near the toilet. It was one of those thin plastic bags you get from a corner store. Something inside it was round, stretching the plastic slightly. Again, my mind went to the same explanation. I assumed it was trash, maybe someone's belongings or something gross left behind. I felt irritated more than anything. I remember muttering to myself, annoyed that people could be so careless and disgusting. Without really thinking, I nudged the bag with my foot. It shifted slightly. Curiosity got the better of me, and I leaned down and tilted it a little, just enough to see inside. The top of the bag opened, and for a split second, my brain couldn't understand what I was looking at. There was something pale and dark at the same time, something wet-looking. Then it clicked. It was a human head. I could see hair matted with blood. The skin looked wrong, grayish and lifeless. There were dark red stains soaked into the plastic. I didn't even fully process the face. My mind refused to accept it, but my body reacted instantly. A wave of fear hit me so hard, it felt like my chest collapsed inward. My stomach dropped, my vision blurred, and I felt like the room was spinning. I screamed, but I don't remember hearing my own voice. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet as I tried to get away. I slammed into the stall door, nearly falling, then somehow turned and ran. I didn't bother closing the restroom door behind me. I sprinted downhill toward the skate park, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Every shadow felt like it was chasing me. I was convinced something was right behind me, even though I didn't hear anything. When I reached my cousins, I was completely hysterical. I was yelling, crying, trying to explain what I had seen, but the words came out jumbled and panicked. At first, they didn't take me seriously. They laughed and rolled their eyes, thinking I was messing with them or overreacting. They had a habit of pranking me, and I had a habit of falling for it, so they assumed this was just another moment of me being scared over nothing. I got angry then, more angry than I had ever been at them. I told them it wasn't funny and that they needed to stop messing with me. I pointed up the hill toward the restroom, telling them exactly where it was, exactly what I saw. That's when their expressions started to change. They could tell I wasn't joking. I was shaking, barely able to stand still. The oldest cousin finally said he would go check it out. He told the others to stay with me and started walking up the hill. I watched him go, feeling sick to my stomach. Part of me hoped he would come back laughing, telling me it was fake, that it was just a stupid prank or something I misunderstood. Another part of me knew deep down that what I saw was real. The minutes felt like hours. I couldn't stop looking up the hill, waiting for him to come back. When he finally did, something was wrong. He didn't say anything. He didn't laugh or joke. His face was pale and his eyes looked distant, like he was trying not to think about what he had just seen. He didn't explain. He just told us it was time to leave. We didn't argue. We didn't ask questions. We packed up, and left the park in silence. The walk home felt heavier than anything I had ever experienced. No one joked. No one teased me. The night felt colder, darker. I kept replaying the image in my head, trying to convince myself it wasn't real, but the fear wouldn't let go. When we got home, we didn't talk about it. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the bag, the blood, the shape of the head inside. I kept thinking about how close I came to touching it, how easily I could have reached in without looking. The thought made me feel sick. A few days later, we heard what had happened. A man in the nearby valley had killed someone, dismembered the body, and dumped parts of it in different places. The head had been left in that park restroom. When I heard that, everything became real in a way it hadn't been before. It wasn't just a nightmare or a scary memory anymore. It was part of something real, something violent and cruel. Even now, years later, that memory hasn't faded. I can still remember the smell of the restroom, the way the lights buzzed when they turned on, the feeling in my chest when I realized what I was looking at. Public restrooms still make me uneasy, especially ones that are old or poorly lit. I always think twice before going into places like that alone. That night changed something in me. It was the moment I realized how close real horror can be, how it can exist in places you think are harmless. A skate park, a public restroom, a normal night with family. It showed me that evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's just sitting there, hidden in a plastic bag, waiting for someone unlucky enough to look inside. In Alaska in the 80s, there was a guy called the Butcher Baker after he was caught, because he owned a bakery and did some questionable things. On the surface, he looked like the kind of person no one would ever suspect. He was relatively well off, successful by local standards, and lived the kind of life that, in Alaska especially, carried a certain rugged appeal. He owned his own cabin deep in the Alaskan wilderness and even had a small plane, which in that part of the world wasn't just a luxury, but a symbol of independence, freedom, and status. To a lot of people, He probably looked like someone who had it all figured out. A business owner, a man with money, someone who knew how to survive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Alaska in the 1980s was still a place where people could reinvent themselves, where distance and isolation created a sense that you could leave your past behind. That kind of environment attracts all kinds of people, including those who want to disappear into the margins of society. He used that image carefully. He would spend time in Fairbanks and Anchorage, places where people gathered, where young women worked, socialized, and looked for a bit of excitement in a place that could otherwise feel isolating. He didn't come across as a creep right away. He was charming enough, confident, and knew exactly what to say. He offered something that sounded like an adventure, a flight over the Alaskan wilderness, a weekend getaway at a private cabin, nature, freedom, something different from the routine of everyday life. For some, that probably sounded incredible. Flying over endless forests, mountains, and snow-covered land, staying at a remote cabin with someone who seemed experienced and capable. In a place like Alaska, that kind of offer didn't automatically raise alarms the way it might somewhere else. People trusted each other more, or at least they wanted to believe they could. But once he had them isolated, everything changed. He would take these women to his cabin and keep them hostage, cut off from the outside world. No easy way to escape. No one nearby to hear them scream or see what was happening. The wilderness itself became a cage. What he did to them there was horrific enough, but the worst part came later. Eventually, he would release them into the Alaskan forest, not to let them go, but to hunt them. He treated it like a twisted game, something straight out of the most dangerous game. He would give them a head start, knowing full well that the terrain, the cold, the vastness of the land, and their fear would work against them. The Alaskan wilderness is unforgiving even to people who know what they're doing. For someone dropped into it without supplies, without a clear sense of direction, and under extreme stress, it becomes a death sentence. He knew the land. He knew how to track. He knew how to wait. And for a long time, he got away with it. People went missing, but in Alaska, disappearances weren't unheard of. Planes crashed. People got lost. Accidents happened. The wilderness swallowed people whole, and sometimes there was no clear answer as to what had gone wrong. That uncertainty created cover for someone like him. The idea that a man was deliberately flying women out and hunting them sounded too extreme, too monstrous for most people to accept right away. What makes this story even more unsettling is how close it came to touching someone my family knew. My mom's friend was apparently approached by this man. He offered her the same thing he offered others: a flight, a weekend at his cabin, an escape from routine. On paper, it might have sounded tempting, or at least interesting, but something about him didn't feel right to her. Maybe it was his tone. Maybe it was the way he looked at her. Maybe it was just a gut feeling she couldn't explain. She politely declined. He didn't take that well. He became rudely insistent, pushing the offer, even after she said no. His demeanor shifted, becoming almost aggressive, like he couldn't stand being refused. That moment, in hindsight, is terrifying. It's often in those small reactions that the truth slips through. The inability to accept rejection, the entitlement, the sense that he believed he was owed something. She stood her ground. She said no, again. She walked away. Less than a year later, he was caught. When the news broke, when his face was shown on television and in newspapers, when the details of what he had been doing started to come out, she recognized him immediately. The man who had pressured her, the man who had insisted she come with him, the man who had reacted with anger when she refused. Realizing how close she had come must have been horrifying. Knowing that a single different choice, a moment of politeness, a decision to not offend someone, could have put her on that plane and into the wilderness, is the kind of realization that stays with you forever. It makes the world feel suddenly unstable, like safety is held together by instinct and luck rather than certainty. What's especially chilling is how ordinary the initial interaction was. There was no dramatic threat, no obvious danger, just a conversation, an offer, a man who seemed confident and successful. That's how predators like this operate. They don't announce themselves, they don't look like monsters. They rely on trust, curiosity, and social pressure. They rely on the fact that many people are taught to be polite, to not make a scene, to give others the benefit of the doubt. Alaska amplified that danger, the isolation, the vast distances, the idea that if something went wrong, help was far away. All of it worked in his favor. The wilderness wasn't just a backdrop, it was part of the crime, a tool, a weapon. When people talk about this case now, it often feels unreal, like something that belongs in fiction rather than real life. But it happened. Real people suffered. Real lives were ended in fear and pain, far from anyone who could help them. And the most unsettling part is how close it came to happening again and again. My mom's friend trusted her instincts. She listened to that quiet voice telling her something wasn't right. She didn't worry about being rude. She didn't worry about hurting his feelings. She walked away. That decision likely saved her life. Others weren't so lucky. Stories like this are terrifying not just because of the violence, but because of how easily it could have happened to almost anyone. A casual conversation, an invitation, a moment where saying yes feels easier than saying no. It's a reminder that danger doesn't always look dangerous at first. Sometimes it looks like opportunity. Sometimes it looks like adventure. Sometimes it looks like a friendly man with a plane and a cabin. The fact that he was caught doesn't erase what he did. It doesn't undo the suffering. But it does leave behind a warning that still matters. Trust your instincts. Pay attention to how people react when you say no. Understand that politeness should never come at the cost of your safety. Even now, decades later, this story is still deeply unsettling. Not because it's mysterious or supernatural, but because it's painfully real. It shows how thin the line can be between a normal interaction and something unimaginable. One decision, one moment, one refusal that makes all the difference. Scary stuff in the most real and uncomfortable way possible. She finished her shift late that night, just like she had done so many times before. Working at a local Little Caesars wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. By the time she clocked out, it was around 11 p.m. The store was quiet, the usual rush long gone, and the air outside felt heavier than it had earlier in the evening. She was tired, ready to go home, ready to be done with the day. Nothing about that moment should have been dangerous. It was routine. It was normal. She didn't have a car, so she called a cab, something she had done plenty of times before. When it arrived, she got in without hesitation, gave the driver her address, and leaned back, expecting the familiar ride home. At first, everything seemed fine. The car pulled away, the city lights passed by the windows, and the sound of traffic filled the silence. But after a few minutes, something started to feel off. It wasn't one specific thing at first. It was a feeling, the kind you can't immediately explain. The streets didn't look familiar. Turns that shouldn't have been happening were happening. The route felt wrong. She checked her phone, trying to stay calm, telling herself she might just be overthinking it. Maybe the driver knew a faster way. Maybe there was construction. Maybe she was just tired and anxious after a long shift. But the feeling didn't go away. It got stronger. She looked up, paying closer attention now. The car was heading in the opposite direction of her home. She recognized enough landmarks to know that for sure. Her heart started to race. She asked the driver about it, trying to keep her voice steady. But whatever response she got didn't reassure her. The fear that had been quietly building suddenly took shape in her chest. She realized she might be in real danger. Her hands shook as she unlocked her phone. She didn't call her family right away. Instead, she messaged a coworker, someone she trusted, someone she thought would take her seriously. Her message was short and desperate. She said she was being kidnapped. She told him to call the police. In that moment, she was reaching out for help in the only way she could. She was hoping for urgency, for concern, for action. She was hoping someone would step in and do something before it was too late. The response she got was devastating. "I can't help you, baby. I am not home yet." Those words landed like a punch. Not only did he not take immediate action, but the tone was casual, dismissive, almost annoyed. There was no panic, no promise to call the police, no questions about where she was or what was happening, just an excuse. She stopped replying. It's impossible to know exactly what she was feeling in those moments, but it's not hard to imagine. Fear, confusion, disbelief. She had done the right thing. She had asked for help. And the person she reached out to failed her completely. After she went silent, he sent more messages. "Baby, are you there? You want me to come for you?" By then, it may have already been too late. Those messages came after the window for real help had closed. They came without urgency, without understanding the seriousness of what she had said. It's chilling to think about how alone she must have felt, sitting in that car, realizing that the one person she reached out to wasn't actually helping at all. What makes this even harder to accept is what didn't happen next. He didn't immediately contact her family. He didn't go to the police. He didn't raise an alarm. Days passed, then weeks, and still he said nothing. Her family had no idea where she was. They waited for her to come home. They waited for a call or a message. At first, they probably assumed something simple had happened. A phone died. Plans changed. Maybe she stayed with a friend. But as time passed, worry set in. Concern turned into fear. Fear turned into desperation. Somewhere during that time, the truth existed, sitting with someone who chose not to share it. Weeks later, when her family finally learned what she had said that night, it was too late to change anything. The damage was already done. The time that could have been used to search, to investigate, to possibly save her was gone. The only physical evidence that has been found so far is her braces, discovered on the side of the road. That detail alone is haunting. Braces are personal. They're not something you can easily lose without noticing. Finding them separated from everything else suggests violence, suggests struggle, suggests something terrible happened. It's a small object, but it carries enormous weight. It's a reminder that she was there, that something happened to her, and that she didn't just disappear on her own. For her family, that discovery must have been unbearable. On one hand, it was proof that she hadn't simply run away. On the other, it confirmed their worst fears. It was evidence without answers, a clue that raised more questions than it solved. What happened after she stopped replying? Where was she taken? Why didn't anyone act sooner? These questions don't fade with time. They get heavier. What makes this story especially painful is how preventable it feels. If the message had been taken seriously, if the police had been called immediately, if her family had been told right away, even small actions taken quickly can make a difference in situations like this. Time matters, minutes matter, and here time was wasted. There is also a deep sense of betrayal woven into this story. She trusted someone enough to tell them she was in danger. She used clear words. She didn't hint or joke. She said she was being kidnapped. That should have triggered immediate action. Instead, it was brushed aside. The casual language of the replies makes it even worse. It shows a complete lack of understanding, empathy, and urgency. It shows how easily someone can fail another person at the exact moment they need help the most. For people hearing this story, it forces uncomfortable reflection. What would you do if someone sent you that message? Would you hesitate? Would you assume they were exaggerating? Would you wait to see if they replied again? Or would you act immediately, even if you weren't sure? This case is a brutal reminder that it's always better to take such messages seriously. Even if there's a chance it's a misunderstanding, the risk of doing nothing is far greater. You can always explain a false alarm. You can't undo silence. Her disappearance also highlights how vulnerable people can be in everyday situations. Leaving work late, taking a cab, trusting that normal routines are safe. Most of the time, they are. But when they aren't, the consequences can be catastrophic. The fact that only her braces have been found makes the story feel unfinished, like a sentence cut off mid-word. There is no closure, no clear ending, just absence. Her family is left with memories, unanswered questions, and the knowledge that she tried to get help, that she reached out, that she did what she was supposed to do, and that the system of people around her failed. This isn't just a story about a crime. It's a story about responsibility, about how our responses to others matter more than we realize, about how dismissive words can echo long after they're sent, about how silence can be just as harmful as action. Somewhere along that road, a young woman lost her life, her future, and her chance to come home. And all that remains, for now, is a small piece of evidence and a series of messages that show how close help might have been, and how quickly it slipped away. Stories like this stay with people because they feel real. They feel possible. They force us to confront the idea that danger doesn't always look dramatic or obvious. Sometimes it starts with a late shift, a cab ride, and a text message that wasn't taken seriously enough. And that's what makes it so disturbing. Not just what happened to her, but how easily it was allowed to happen. Honestly, what would you have done if someone texted you, "I'm being kidnapped"? Would you call 911 immediately, or would you hesitate? Drop your honest answer below, because I genuinely want to know how you'd react in that moment. When I was younger, I used to spend a lot of time at my friend Grady's house. He lived on a street really close to mine, close enough that we could walk back and forth without thinking much about it. We had known each other for a long time, and staying over at each other's houses was normal for us. Nothing about that night felt strange at first. It was supposed to be one of those simple, boring sleepovers, where you stay up too late, talk about random stuff, and then pass out wherever you happen to be. That evening, we were already at Grady's house, getting ready to sleep, when I realized I had forgotten some of my things at home. It was around 10:30 at night. His parents weren't home, which wasn't unusual, and his house felt quiet and empty in the way houses do when adults aren't around. We decided it would be easier to just walk over to my place, grab my stuff, and come back. The walk itself was completely normal. The streetlights were on, the neighborhood was quiet, and nothing felt off. We were talking and joking the whole way. I grabbed my things from my house, and we headed back to Grady's place. Again, nothing strange happened on the walk back. It felt like any other night. When we got to his house, we unlocked the door and walked inside. The house was dark except for a few lights, and it had that quiet, empty feeling again. We went straight to the room where we planned to sleep. It was basically a spare room, not very big, with a couch in it where one of us usually slept. As soon as we walked in, we both stopped at the same time. Sitting on the couch was a red Elmo doll. It was placed upright, like someone had set it there on purpose. The thing that immediately stood out was that the doll had not been there earlier. We were both sure of that. We had been in that room before we left to go to my house, and the couch had been empty. At first, we just stared at it. Neither of us said anything for a few seconds. It didn't feel scary right away. It felt confusing. Elmo is a kid's toy, something bright and cheerful, and seeing it there didn't make sense. Grady joked that maybe his brother was messing with us. That explanation made sense at first, because his brother liked to pull pranks sometimes. But then we remembered that his brother wasn't home. He hadn't been there all evening. That's when the confusion started turning into something else. We started asking each other questions. When did it get there? Who could have put it there? We walked around the room, checking the corners and looking behind the couch, half expecting his brother to jump out laughing. Nothing happened. The house was completely silent. The more we thought about it, the less funny it felt. The doll wasn't just tossed on the couch. It looked placed. That detail stuck with me. Someone had taken the time to put it there, sitting upright, facing the room. We didn't hear anyone come in or leave. The doors had been locked when we arrived. The house was supposed to be empty. That's when we started panicking. Not full-on screaming panic, but that nervous energy where your heart starts beating faster and your thoughts won't slow down. We suddenly didn't want to be in that house anymore. Without really talking it through, we both decided to leave. We ran out of the room, out of the house, and straight back toward my place. When we got to my house, I woke my dad up and told him what happened. I probably didn't explain it very well. I was talking fast, jumping from one detail to another, trying to make him understand why we were scared. To his credit, he took it seriously. He didn't laugh or brush it off. He grabbed his pistol and I grabbed a BB gun. Looking back, it sounds ridiculous, but at the time, it made me feel a little safer. The three of us walked back to Grady's house together. Having my dad there changed the feeling a bit. I felt less scared, but still tense. The house looked normal from the outside. No broken windows that we could see at first. No signs that anyone had been there. We went inside and started searching the house. We checked every room. Closets, bathrooms, the kitchen, the garage. We looked under beds and behind doors. Everything looked normal. There was no sign of anyone hiding. The Elmo doll was still there on the couch, exactly where we had seen it before. That somehow made it worse. It hadn't moved. It was just sitting there, like it belonged. Right when we were about to give up and assume it was nothing, we noticed something strange. One of the windows was open. It wasn't wide open, but it was definitely not closed. None of us could remember if it had been open before. My dad checked it and looked outside, but there was nothing there. No footprints, no noise, nothing obvious. In the end, we convinced ourselves it was probably nothing. Maybe someone forgot to close the window earlier. Maybe the doll had been there the whole time and we just didn't notice it before. That explanation didn't fully sit right with me, but it was easier than thinking about the alternatives. My dad left and Grady and I stayed the night. We didn't sleep very well. Every little sound made us sit up and listen. The house felt different after that, like it wasn't as safe as it used to feel. The Elmo doll stayed in the room, but we moved it out of sight. Even then, I kept thinking about it. I kept wondering who could have put it there and why. The next morning, I went home, and life went back to normal. School, chores, regular stuff. The whole thing started to feel like a weird story we would laugh about later. I told myself it really was just a prank or a misunderstanding. A few days later, I was in my garage at home, looking for something. As I turned around, my stomach dropped. Sitting there, among our stuff, was the same red Elmo doll. I knew it was the same one. I can't explain how I knew, but I was sure of it. Seeing it there didn't feel funny at all. It felt wrong. I stood there staring at it, trying to make sense of how it could have gotten there. No one in my family owned an Elmo doll. No one had mentioned bringing one home. I didn't tell anyone right away. part of me was afraid of sounding crazy. Another part of me didn't want to know the answer. To this day, I still don't know how that doll moved from Grady's house to my garage. I don't know who put it there or why. It wasn't violent. Nothing bad actually happened. But that's what makes it unsettling in a quiet way. There was no explanation that ever fully made sense. Sometimes the scariest things aren't loud or dramatic. Sometimes they're just small, confusing moments that don't fit into the world the way they're supposed to. A toy where it doesn't belong. An open window with no answers. A feeling that someone was there when they shouldn't have been. Even now, when I think about that night, I still get that same uneasy feeling, like there's a piece of the story I'll never understand. I live in a quiet mountain town in Colorado, the kind of place people imagine as peaceful and untouched, where the nights are dark enough to see every star and the mornings are so quiet you can hear snow falling off tree branches. It's the kind of place where people mind their own business, where you get used to being alone, and where the wilderness isn't something you visit on weekends. It's something you live inside of every day. Hunting is just part of life here. I hunt deer regularly, usually every few weeks when the season allows. I don't go far by most people's standards, maybe a mile or two into the woods from my house, but out here that's more than enough to be completely isolated. Once you're past the tree line and the last sign of a trail disappears, you're on your own. No cell service, no quick help. Just you, the forest, and whatever else happens to be out there. Because of that, I don't go in unprepared. I always carry at least one high caliber handgun, sometimes two depending on the day, and I bring my .308 hunting rifle with me. People who don't live out here might think that's excessive, but it isn't. There are mountain lions, bears, moose, and sometimes people who don't want to be found. When you're miles from help, you don't get second chances. There's also something else about my hunts that most people wouldn't believe if I told them. Over time, I've formed a strange sort of relationship with a wild wolf. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds stupid or dangerous or like something out of a movie. I'm fully aware that at any moment that animal could decide I'm no longer useful or familiar and turn on me. I don't pretend otherwise. But somehow, over time, it's learned that I'm not a threat. And I've learned how to read its behavior well enough to know when to keep my distance. It doesn't follow me closely. It doesn't act like a dog. It keeps its space. But it has helped me track deer more than once, and its presence alone keeps other predators away. I don't trust it completely, and I never will. But out there, it's almost like having another set of eyes that belong to the woods themselves. The day this happened was deep winter, real winter, not the kind people imagine when they think of snow falling gently in a postcard scene. This was brutal cold, the kind that burns your lungs when you breathe, the kind that makes metal sting your skin if you touch it without gloves. It was around -10 degrees Fahrenheit, and there was a solid foot of snow on the ground, maybe more in some places where the wind had piled it up. I was dressed for it. Heavy winter coat, fleece-lined jeans, thick snow boots rated for extreme cold, a knit cap pulled down low, scarf wrapped tight around my face, and snow goggles to keep the wind from tearing my eyes apart. Even with all that, the cold still found its way in. It always does. I had been moving slowly, watching for tracks, listening to the quiet, snow-absorbed sound in a way that makes everything feel unreal, like the world is holding its breath. The wolf was somewhere ahead of me, not visible, but I could sense it the way you learn to sense things when you spend enough time alone out there. That's when I saw him. At first, it was just a shape in the distance, maybe 3 miles out. That alone wasn't unusual. This area is a popular hunting and fishing spot, even in winter. I see other hunters sometimes, and occasionally fishermen if the conditions allow it. Most people stick closer to the roads, but some go deeper, especially locals who know the land. But something about this figure was wrong immediately. He stood out in a way I can't fully explain, like a white circle painted on a red background, like something that didn't belong in the picture no matter how hard you tried to justify it. He wasn't wearing shoes, no boots, no socks, just bare feet in deep snow. He was wearing a green t-shirt and cargo shorts. That was it. No coat, no gloves, no hat, no visible gear. Nothing that made sense for where he was or the conditions he was in. In that kind of cold, exposed skin doesn't just get uncomfortable, it gets damaged fast. Frostbite doesn't take hours, it takes minutes. I stopped moving and just watched him. He was far enough away that I couldn't see details clearly with the naked eye, but even from that distance, I knew something was deeply wrong. He wasn't shivering. He wasn't moving like someone trying to stay warm. He walked calmly, steadily, like the temperature didn't exist. I raised my rifle, not because I felt threatened yet, but because I wanted a better look. I hadn't loaded the .308. The chamber was empty. This was just to use the scope to see what I was dealing with. When I looked through the scope, my stomach tightened. His skin didn't look right. It wasn't the color that bothered me. It was the texture. It looked smooth, in a way skin shouldn't look. Not shiny exactly, but flat, like plastic or rubber stretched over a frame. There were no visible blemishes, no redness from the cold, no signs of exposure at all. I remember thinking maybe it was just the distance, the light, the way the snow reflected everything. I tried to rationalize it. The brain always does that first. It looks for the least frightening explanation. I lowered the rifle for a moment and glanced toward where I knew the wolf should be. That's when I heard movement in the snow behind me. My first thought was deer. My second thought was another hunter. Footsteps sound different in snow, but in that moment, my brain was already overloaded and I didn't analyze it properly. I turned slowly, already tense, already gripping my rifle tighter. It was him, not 3 miles away, not half a mile away, right there, close enough that I could see him clearly without the scope. I don't know how he moved that fast. I don't know how I didn't hear him sooner. Snow that deep should have slowed anyone down. It should have made noise, but he was just there, standing among the trees like he had always been part of them. Up close, there was no mistaking it. He didn't have a face, not in the way people understand faces. There were no eyes, no nose, no mouth, no features at all. Just a smooth, blank surface where a face should have been, slightly curved, slightly uneven, like it was trying to approximate the shape of a human head without understanding what made it human. And somehow, impossibly, he was looking right at me. I know that doesn't make sense. I know you can't look without eyes, but that's the only way to describe it. I felt his attention lock onto me in a way that was immediate and overwhelming. It wasn't curiosity, it wasn't confusion, it was awareness. He knew I was there. He knew I had been watching him. Every instinct in my body screamed at once. My hands went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. Time felt thick, stretched out, like I was moving through syrup. I remember thinking about my rifle, about the fact that it wasn't loaded, about how stupid that suddenly felt. I remember thinking about the wolf and realizing I couldn't sense it anymore. My mind tried one last time to force logic into the situation. If this was a person, how was he alive in that cold? How did he move that fast? How did he cross that distance without leaving obvious tracks or making noise? How did he know exactly where I was looking from? None of it added up. Then he moved. He didn't run like a human. There was no panic, no stumbling, no struggle with the snow. He just turned and went into the woods, fast, fluid, disappearing between the trees in seconds. Branches didn't slow him down. Snow didn't trip him up. It was like the terrain didn't apply to him the way it applies to everything else. I didn't chase him. I didn't raise my rifle. I didn't shout. Every survival instinct I had told me one thing, loud and clear: leave, now. I turned around and started moving back the way I came, fast but controlled. I didn't run. Running makes noise. Running makes mistakes. I kept my head on a swivel, scanning the trees, listening for any sound that didn't belong. The forest felt different then, heavier, like it was watching me too. Every shadow looked wrong. Every tree trunk felt like it could hide something. The cold didn't matter anymore. Fear burned hotter than the temperature ever could. I don't know if he followed me. I don't know if he watched from a distance. I don't know if the wolf was still there, keeping its distance, or if it had fled long before I noticed anything was wrong. All I know is that I didn't stop moving until I was out of the woods and close enough to my house to see it through the trees. Even then, I didn't relax. I went inside, locked the door, and sat there for a long time without doing anything. I replayed every second in my head, trying to find a normal explanation. A prank, a person in a suit, a hallucination caused by cold or exhaustion. None of those explanations survived more than a few seconds of honest thought. People don't survive that cold dressed like that. People don't move like that. People don't have faces like that. And people don't suddenly appear behind you in deep snow without a sound. I still hunt. I still go into the woods. I still carry my weapons. But I don't go as deep as I used to, and I don't stay as long. The woods haven't felt the same since that day. They feel less like a place I know and more like a place that tolerates me. Sometimes when the wind is right and the snow is fresh, I think about that blank face and the way it somehow saw me. I think about how small I felt, how quickly confidence turned into pure instinct. Whatever that thing was, it didn't belong out there any more than it belonged anywhere else. And the worst part is knowing that if I hadn't looked through that scope, if I hadn't noticed him, he might have noticed me first. That thought alone is enough to make me turn back early every time. One of my childhood friend's mom had a story that stayed with me for years. The kind of story that doesn't jump out at you right away, but slowly sinks in and gets worse the more you think about it. I remember hearing it for the first time as a kid and feeling that deep, crawling discomfort that doesn't come from monsters or ghosts, but from the idea that something real and human was wrong in a way you couldn't easily see. When she was in her early 20s, long before she had kids, she rented a townhouse with a close friend. It wasn't a huge place, but it was bigger than what most people in their situation could afford, which already made it feel a little strange. The layout itself was odd. There was a ground floor, an upstairs, and for some reason, an attic. Not a small crawl space, but a full attic you could actually walk into. Neither of them really understood why a townhouse needed an attic like that, but they didn't question it too much at the time. When they first moved in, they did the usual unpacking and exploring, opening doors, checking closets, getting a feel for the place. Eventually, curiosity led them up into the attic. It wasn't finished or decorated, just a dusty, dim space used for storage. That's where they saw it. Sitting there in the attic was a clown statue, not a small figurine, but something closer to life-sized, big enough to immediately grab your attention. It wasn't colorful or cheerful the way clown decorations are supposed to be. It looked old, worn, and unsettling. The paint was faded in places, the smile too wide, the eyes fixed in a way that felt wrong. It didn't look like a toy. It looked like something meant to be seen from a distance, not up close. They both thought it was creepy, but neither of them thought much beyond that. People leave weird things behind when they move out. Old furniture, decorations, junk they don't want to deal with. The attic wasn't a space they planned to use anyway, so they shrugged it off. They didn't move the statue, they didn't touch it. They just left it where it was and closed the attic door. For the first few months, everything felt normal. They settled into their routines: work, friends, nights in, nights out. The townhouse became home. The attic faded into the background of their minds, and the clown statue became one of those weird details you forget about unless someone brings it up. Then small things started happening. At first, it was easy to explain away. A door would be open that they were sure they had closed. A cabinet in the kitchen would be slightly ajar. They assumed it was forgetfulness. When you live with someone else, it's easy to blame each other for things like that. Maybe one of them opened it and didn't remember. Maybe it hadn't been fully shut in the first place. Then food started going missing. Not entire meals or anything obvious, just small things. A drink gone from the fridge. A snack missing that one of them was sure they hadn't eaten. Again, they blamed each other. Maybe someone grabbed it late at night and forgot. Maybe they miscounted. It was annoying, but not alarming. Over time, though, the pattern became harder to ignore. Things kept going missing. Doors kept opening. Items were moved just enough to be noticeable. The house started to feel off in a way that's hard to describe. Not loud or dramatic, just wrong. Like the place wasn't as empty as it should have been. They started joking about it being haunted. That's what people do when they don't want to face a more uncomfortable explanation. It was easier to laugh and say the place had a ghost than to seriously consider that something else might be going on. They talked about it with friends. People laughed, told spooky stories, suggested sage, or joked about the clown being cursed. The attic stayed untouched. Neither of them wanted to go back up there. The memory of that clown statue lingered in the back of their minds, but they avoided thinking about it. It was like an unspoken agreement between them. As long as they didn't go up there, they didn't have to deal with it. Eventually, the tension built to a point where they couldn't ignore it anymore. One night, after another argument about missing food and unexplained noises, they decided they needed to check the attic again. Not because they truly believed the clown was responsible, but because it was the one part of the house they had never fully dealt with. They went up together. The attic looked the same at first glance. Dusty, quiet, still. But then they noticed something that made their stomachs drop. The clown statue was in a different position. When they had first seen it, it had been sitting in a certain pose. They were both sure of that. Now it was angled differently. The head was turned slightly. The arms weren't positioned the same way. It wasn't subtle. It was obvious enough that both of them noticed it immediately, without having to say anything. They stood there staring at it, trying to convince themselves they were misremembering. Maybe they hadn't paid close attention before. Maybe the lighting made it look different. Maybe it had shifted over time. Then the clown winked. Not a mechanical twitch. Not something you could mistake for a trick of the light. It deliberately closed one eye and opened it again. That was it. They didn't scream. They didn't argue. They didn't try to investigate further. Survival instinct kicked in all at once. They ran. They bolted down the stairs out of the townhouse and didn't stop until they were outside, shaking and breathless. They didn't grab their phones or their keys. They just got out. Once they were far enough away to feel even a little safe, they called the police. When officers arrived, they went back into the house with them. The women stayed outside, too terrified to go back in. The police searched the townhouse thoroughly, including the attic. What they found was worse than anything involving ghosts or haunted houses. The clown statue wasn't a statue at all. It was a man, an escaped patient from a mental hospital, according to what they were later told. He had somehow gotten into the townhouse and had been living there for weeks without them knowing. The attic had given him a place to hide, and the clown costume had allowed him to stay perfectly still when necessary. He had been coming down at night or when they were gone, opening doors, eating their food, moving around the house. The reason things had gone missing wasn't a ghost, it was him. The reason doors were opening wasn't a haunting, it was him. The reason the clown had changed position was because it wasn't an object. It was a person adjusting himself when no one was watching. The wink wasn't a trick, it was intentional. When I first heard this story as a kid, I didn't want to believe it. It sounded too perfect, too much like an urban legend. A creepy clown, strange happenings, a shocking reveal. It felt like the kind of story people exaggerate over time, adding details to make it scarier. But the thing that made it stick with me was that everyone around her backed it up. Her friends, her family, people who had no reason to lie about it. The details never changed. The reactions were always the same. As far as anyone knows, the story is completely authentic. What makes it truly unsettling isn't the clown costume or even the mental hospital escape. It's the idea of someone living in your home without you knowing, sharing your space, watching you, learning your routines, eating your food, standing perfectly still while you walk past, unaware that you're not alone. It's the realization that the house wasn't haunted, it was occupied. That story changed the way I thought about attics, crawl spaces, and unused rooms. It made me realize how easy it is to ignore parts of our homes we don't use, to assume that if we don't go somewhere, nothing is happening there. It also showed me how quickly the human mind jumps to supernatural explanations when the truth is too disturbing to consider. As a kid, the image of that clown winking stayed with me for years, not because it was spooky in a fun way, but because it meant the moment of realization, the exact second when fear turned into understanding, when the unknown became something far more real and far more dangerous. Even now, as an adult, I think about that story whenever I hear unexplained noises in a house or notice something slightly out of place. I think about how long those women lived with danger without knowing it, how close they were to someone who shouldn't have been there at all. It's not a ghost story, it's worse. It's a reminder that sometimes the scariest things aren't imaginary. Sometimes they're real, breathing, watching, and hiding just out of sight, waiting for you to notice them. Okay, real talk. Do you think that clown story actually happened, or is it just an urban legend? Because honestly, I've heard versions of this from different places and I can't tell anymore. What do you think? My mom took a job as a paramedic in a small town in West Texas in the early 1990s. At the time, it felt like a good move. She was young, motivated, and excited to work in emergency medicine. West Texas towns can be quiet and close-knit, and for someone starting out in that kind of career, it seemed like a place where you could really get experience and settle into a routine. Once she had the job, the next step was finding somewhere affordable to live. Housing options were limited, and my parents didn't have much money to throw around. They started looking at rentals and eventually found a small house out past the municipal airport. It wasn't right in town, but that also meant it was cheaper. The area felt isolated but not dangerous, just empty land, wide skies, and the occasional sound of planes coming and going. The landlord seemed friendly enough. Nothing about him raised any red flags. He showed them the house, went over the paperwork, and everything seemed straightforward. So my mom signed the lease, and she and my dad started moving in, thinking they'd found a decent place to start this new chapter. Then my mom had her first day on the ambulance. She was paired with a shift partner, someone who had been working in that town for a while. As they were getting to know each other, the conversation turned to where my mom was living. It was casual, just the kind of small talk you make on a long shift. When my mom gave her the address, everything changed. Her partner's entire demeanor flipped. She went from relaxed to visibly alarmed in an instant. She didn't laugh it off or question it. She flat out panicked. She told my mom that she needed to get out of that house immediately, and even offered to help her move right then and there. My mom was confused. Her partner then explained why. The previous tenant of that house had been a man who was released from the state hospital. According to official evaluations, he was deemed no longer a risk to himself or others. On paper, he was considered safe to return to normal life. He moved back into that same house with his wife. Within a month, he completely snapped. He rampaged through the house, violently attacking his wife. At some point, she managed to lock herself in the bathroom, trying to escape him. It didn't save her. He broke through the door frame, forced his way in, and brutally murdered her. What he did afterward was even worse. He dismembered her body inside the house. He then tried to burn her remains in the backyard. When that didn't work, he put what was left of her into trash bags and threw them over the fence into a neighbor's yard. The story wasn't rumor or gossip. It was something people in town knew. First responders knew. Law enforcement knew. It was part of the town's dark history. My mom was shaken, but she and my dad were also skeptical, not because they thought her co-worker was lying, but because it sounded so extreme, so unreal, like something out of a horror movie. They wanted to believe there had been some kind of misunderstanding or exaggeration. Still, they couldn't ignore it completely. That night, they went back to the house and started looking more closely. They pulled back sections of carpet and noticed that part of the hardwood floor underneath had been removed and replaced. Not repaired cleanly, but cut out, like someone had taken out a section and tried to hide it. Then they looked at the bathroom. The door frame showed clear signs of damage. Not wear and tear, not old settling. It looked like it had been forced open, splintered wood, stress marks, damage that didn't match any innocent explanation. At that point, there was no more doubt. The story was real. My parents didn't stay long after that. They packed up what they could and left. They didn't get their deposit back. The landlord didn't care, but my parents didn't fight it. Losing that money felt insignificant compared to the idea of staying in a house where something that violent had happened. More than that, they were terrified of one specific possibility. What if the man ever got out again? He had already been declared safe once before. That decision had cost someone her life. My parents didn't want to be anywhere near that house if history repeated itself, so they walked away and never looked back. Years passed. Life moved on. Then, in 2016, I ended up living in the same town for college. It was strange being there, knowing my parents' history with the place, but I didn't think much about that house anymore. It felt like ancient history, something terrible but long over, until it wasn't. That year, news broke that the man who murdered his wife had simply walked out of the institution where he was being held in San Antonio, not transferred, not released under supervision. He walked out, just like that. The idea that he was free again, somewhere out there, was chilling, especially knowing how easily he had been deemed not a risk before, knowing how wrong that assessment had been, knowing how close my parents had come to living in that house longer. It put everything into perspective. Mental health systems fail, paperwork fails, evaluations fail, and when they do, the consequences aren't abstract. They're real, they're violent, and they leave scars that last for decades. Even now, thinking about it makes my skin crawl. How close my parents came to staying in that house. How easily they could have dismissed the warning. How one co-worker's reaction likely kept them from something far worse. Sometimes the scariest stories aren't about ghosts or the supernatural. They're about people. And how easily danger can hide behind paperwork, friendly landlords, and the assumption that someone else has already made sure everything is safe. My grandfather worked for Florida Power and Light back in the 1980s, long before safety rules became as strict as they are now. His job wasn't just about restoring electricity after storms or fixing damaged lines. Back then, the power company crews were often called to accident scenes as well. If a car had wrapped itself around a light pole, slid off the road, or ended up somewhere it absolutely didn't belong, his crew might be sent out to help remove it. They had the heavy trucks, the cables, and the experience to deal with situations most people didn't want to get close to. He talked about those years often, but usually in a calm, almost casual way. He had seen plenty of bad accidents. He had seen people hurt, sometimes killed, and he understood that death was part of the job when you worked around roads and heavy equipment. Most of those memories stayed where they belonged, filed away like old paperwork. But there was one call he responded to that never left him. No matter how much time passed, it followed him for the rest of his life. The call came in one day about an accident out on Payne's Prairie Preserve State Park. The area is vast and open, with long stretches of road cutting through wetlands and swamp. It's beautiful in its own way, but it can also feel isolated. Back then, it was even quieter than it is now. If something went wrong out there, help could take a while to arrive. A man had driven off the road and into the swamp. That much was clear from the report. It sounded like a straightforward recovery job. Cars left the road all the time, especially in areas like that. Maybe the driver had fallen asleep. Maybe he swerved to avoid an animal. Maybe it was just bad luck. None of that seemed unusual to my grandfather when he first heard the call. When his crew arrived, they could see the car partially submerged in the swampy water, surrounded by thick grass and mud. The front end was buried deep, and the back end was barely visible above the earth's surface. From a distance, it looked like a bad crash, but not necessarily a horrifying one. Accidents like that happened, and usually the cause of death, if there was one, was obvious. Drowning, blunt force trauma, something you could understand, even if it was tragic. They got to work the way they always did. They secured the area, positioned the truck, and hooked cables to the car. Everything felt routine. My grandfather later said that nothing about the scene prepared him for what they were about to see. There were no warning signs, no strange smells, no movement in the water that caught his attention. When they finally pulled the car free of the swamp, the truth revealed itself all at once. The man inside hadn't died from the crash. He was covered from head to toe in baby water moccasins. They were everywhere, wrapped around his arms, his legs, his torso. Some were still moving, others were crushed or tangled together. It was clear immediately what had happened. The man hadn't just driven into water. He had driven straight into a nest, a bed of snakes hidden beneath the surface of the swamp. Baby water moccasins are small, but they are venomous from birth. Unlike adults, they don't always control how much venom they release when they bite. That makes them especially dangerous. The man must have been alive after the crash, at least for a short time. Long enough for the snakes to react. Long enough for them to swarm him. My grandfather said the realization hit him like a physical blow. He had seen death before, but this was different. This wasn't fast. This wasn't clean. This was panic and pain and terror happening all at once, in a place where no one could hear you scream. The scene was chaos. Men who had worked accidents for years froze where they stood. Some stepped back immediately. Others couldn't look away. The snakes were still there, clinging to the body, tangled in the wreckage. It was like something out of a nightmare, something that didn't belong in the real world. They cleared the area as quickly as they could. The authorities were notified. Procedures were followed. But none of that erased what they had seen. You can't unsee something like that. You can't file it away neatly and move on. My grandfather didn't talk about it much at first. When he did mention it, his voice changed. He became quieter, more careful with his words. He never went into graphic detail, unless someone asked directly, and even then, he kept it simple. He didn't need to exaggerate. The truth was bad enough. As the years went on, the effects of that day became more obvious. He started having nightmares, not just once or twice, but regularly. He would wake up sweating, sometimes shouting. My grandmother said there were nights when he would sit straight up in bed, breathing hard, his eyes wide open like he was still there in the swamp. He dreamed of snakes constantly, not just seeing them, but feeling them, crawling over his skin, wrapping around his arms and legs. He would wake up brushing at himself, convinced for a few seconds that they were real. Even during the day, certain things could trigger him. Tall grass, murky water, the sound of something moving where he couldn't see it. He avoided places like Payne's Prairie after that. He had no interest in fishing, hiking, or doing anything that brought him close to swamps or wetlands. Florida is full of places like that, but he learned how to steer clear of them. He didn't talk about it as fear, he talked about it as respect. But everyone who knew him could tell it was more than that. What haunted him most wasn't just the snakes, it was the thought of the man's final moments, the idea of surviving the crash, only to realize where you are. The sudden movement in the water, the pain, the confusion, the helplessness. My grandfather would sometimes say that dying in an accident is one thing, but dying like that is something else entirely. He carried that image with him into old age. Even when his memory started to fade in other areas, that story remained clear. He could still describe the swamp, the car, the moment they pulled it free. Some memories burn themselves so deeply into a person that time can't touch them. Looking back now, I understand why that incident stayed with him. It wasn't just about death. It was about how unpredictable and cruel the world can be. One wrong turn on a quiet road, one hidden danger beneath the surface, and suddenly everything changes. That accident taught him that there are things out there you can't see, can't plan for, and can't escape once you're in them. It taught him that nature doesn't care about intentions or mistakes. It just reacts. My grandfather lived a long life, but those nightmares never fully went away. Even in his final years, he would sometimes wake up afraid, his hands shaking, his breath short. My grandmother learned to calm him without asking questions. She knew exactly what he was seeing. To most people, it's just a story, a strange, horrifying thing that happened decades ago. But to him, it was real and it was permanent. It followed him home from that swamp and never truly left. That's the part people don't always understand about jobs like his. You don't just fix poles and clear wrecks. Sometimes you carry the weight of what you find there for the rest of your life. Last Thursday started like any other normal day, at least on the surface. Life moved on the way it always does, with people going to work, running errands, and handling their routines without thinking much about it. It wasn't until later that day that the news began to spread quietly through the area. A family had been reported missing. There weren't many details at first, just a few vague pieces of information passed from one person to another. No official statements, no clear timeline, no names shared openly yet. Just the unsettling fact that an entire family had seemingly vanished. I didn't know much about them. I still don't. I was only told a few things, and even those were unclear. I don't know how many people were in the family, how old they were, or where exactly they lived. All I knew was that they had gone out on a boat ride and never came back. In a place where boating is common and usually safe, that alone was enough to make people uneasy. Boats don't just disappear without a trace. Families don't just vanish without someone noticing. What made the situation feel even stranger was something my father mentioned later that same day. He hadn't known about the missing family at the time, not when he saw what he saw. To him, it was just something odd, something that didn't quite make sense but also didn't seem important enough to dwell on. It was only after the news of the missing family started circulating that his memory of that moment took on a much darker meaning. Earlier that Thursday, my father had been near the water. He spends a lot of time around boats and docks, so seeing unusual things doesn't always stand out to him right away. But this time, something caught his attention. He saw one boat dragging another boat behind it, not towing it in an organized or professional way, but dragging it in a way that looked rough and careless. The second boat didn't appear to be occupied. It wasn't moving on its own. It was just being pulled along, almost like it didn't matter what condition it was in. At the time, my father didn't think much of it. Boats get towed all the time for mechanical issues. Sometimes people help each other out on the water. Sometimes boats break down. There are plenty of harmless explanations for one boat pulling another. So he watched for a moment, noted that it looked strange, and then went on with his day. Later, when I heard about the missing family, I mentioned it to him. I asked him if he had heard anything, if he knew anything more than what was being said. That's when he brought up what he had seen earlier. The timing immediately stood out. The family had gone missing on a boat ride that same day. And on that same day, my father had seen a boat dragging another boat away. I asked him why he thought it mattered. At first, he hesitated. He didn't want to jump to conclusions. But then he shared his theory. And once he said it out loud, it was hard not to feel a chill run through me. He believed the family may have been murdered. According to his theory, the people responsible didn't just want to hurt the family, they wanted the boat. Boats can be valuable, especially if they're in good condition. They can be sold, stripped for parts, or used for other crimes. If someone wanted to steal a boat without drawing attention, killing the owners and making it look like an accident or disappearance would be one way to do it. The image in my head was immediate and disturbing. A family out on the water, trusting that they were safe. Maybe they thought it would be a relaxing trip. Maybe it was something they did often. Then, at some point, they encountered the wrong people. People who didn't see them as human beings, but as obstacles standing between them and something they wanted. If my father's theory is right, the family's boat was taken by force. The original occupants were removed, one way or another. The empty boat was then dragged away, possibly to avoid suspicion, or because it couldn't be driven normally anymore. The idea that the boat my father saw being dragged could have belonged to that family is horrifying. What makes this even harder to process is how quiet everything feels. There's no dramatic footage, no clear suspect, no answers, just absence. A family that didn't come home. A boat ride that never ended the way it was supposed to. A strange sight on the water that now feels impossible to ignore. I keep thinking about how many crimes go unnoticed at first because they blend into everyday life. A boat towing another boat doesn't automatically signal danger. It's only when you connect it to something else, like a missing family, that it becomes alarming. By then, it may already be too late. My father has replayed that moment in his mind over and over. He wonders if he should have paid more attention, if he should have reported it, if there was anything about the boats that could have helped identify them later. But at the time, there was no reason to think it was connected to anything serious. That's the cruel part. Most people don't realize they're witnessing something important until after the fact. The idea that people could kill an entire family just to steal a boat is hard to accept, but it's not impossible. History is full of crimes that started with greed and ended in tragedy. When money or valuables are involved, some people stop seeing others as lives and start seeing them as problems to eliminate. What haunts me the most is thinking about the family themselves. Wherever they are, whatever happened to them, they didn't deserve it. They went out on the water expecting to come back. They probably didn't imagine that their trip would turn into the last thing they ever did together. Their loved ones are now left waiting, hoping, and fearing all at once. There's also the possibility that my father's theory is wrong. Maybe the family's disappearance had nothing to do with the boats he saw. Maybe the dragging was unrelated. Maybe it was just a coincidence. I want to believe that. I want to believe there's another explanation, something less violent, something that ends with the family being found alive. But coincidences are hard to ignore when the timing lines up so closely. Every time I think about it, my mind fills in the gaps with worst-case scenarios. Silence on the water, an empty boat, people who know exactly what they're doing and how to make others disappear. It makes the world feel smaller and more dangerous than it did before. Now, whenever I hear about the search efforts, I think about that boat being dragged. I think about how easily evidence can move, how quickly it can vanish. Water hides things well. It erases tracks. It swallows proof. If something terrible did happen out there, finding answers may take a long time, if it happens at all. For now, all anyone can do is wait for updates, wait for discoveries, wait for confirmation of what really happened. The uncertainty is heavy. It hangs over the situation like a cloud that refuses to move. Whether my father's theory turns out to be true or not, one thing is certain. A family is missing, and that alone is a tragedy. Someone, somewhere knows what happened. And until the truth comes out, every strange detail, every unexplained sighting will feel like a possible piece of a much darker puzzle. Last Thursday will not be easily forgotten, not because of something dramatic that happened in plain sight, but because of what might have happened quietly, out on the water, where no one was watching closely enough. Sorry to interrupt. If you're new here, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to Shadow Archives for daily true horror content that will haunt your dreams and keep you wondering what lurks in the shadows. And don't forget to tap the notification bell so you never miss a new story when the darkness calls out to you. In 2014, a ferry set out on what was supposed to be a normal journey in South Korea. On board were more than 300 people, most of them students on a school trip. For many of them, it was meant to be a break from routine, a chance to travel with friends, laugh, take photos, and make memories they would talk about for years. Parents watched their children leave with packed bags and excited smiles, trusting that they would return home safely in a day or two. No one imagined that this trip would end in one of the worst maritime tragedies in the country's history. The ferry was large and familiar, a vessel that had made similar trips before. To the passengers, especially the students, it felt safe simply because it existed. People tend to trust things that look official and routine. The crew wore uniforms. The announcement sounded calm and professional. Everything about the situation suggested that they were in good hands. That sense of trust would later become one of the most painful parts of the story. As the ferry moved through the water, something went wrong. The ship began to tilt. At first, it wasn't dramatic. A slight lean can feel strange, but not immediately dangerous. Some passengers may have thought it was just a turn or a temporary imbalance. But the tilt grew worse. Objects started sliding across the floors. Furniture shifted. People struggled to keep their balance. Confusion spread quickly, especially among the students, many of whom were still in their cabins. During this time, announcements came over the loudspeaker. The captain and crew told the passengers to stay calm. They told them to remain where they were. They assured everyone that the situation was under control. Teachers repeated these instructions to the students, telling them to listen, to stay put, to trust the adults and the crew. In moments of fear, people often cling to authority. When someone in charge tells you to wait, you wait. When they tell you everything will be okay, You want to believe them. While the passengers were being told to stay inside, the situation outside was very different. The ferry continued to tip. Water began entering the ship. Time was slipping away. And yet, the people who were responsible for the safety of everyone on board did not act as they should have. Instead of organizing an evacuation, instead of guiding passengers to safety, the captain and several crew members focused on saving themselves. One by one, members of the crew made their way off the ferry. They escaped to safety while hundreds of passengers remained trapped inside. Many of those passengers were teenagers who had been taught their entire lives to listen to adults, to follow rules, and to trust authority figures. They stayed in their cabins because they were told to. They waited because they believed help was coming. When the Coast Guard finally arrived, the scene was chaotic and unclear. There was no strong leadership. No clear rescue operation began right away. People on nearby boats and on the shore watched as the ferry slowly sank. The ship leaned further and further until large parts of it disappeared beneath the water. Inside, people were still alive, still waiting, still hoping someone would come for them. Phones became lifelines. Passengers called their parents, sending messages, making final phone calls. Many of these conversations were filled with fear, confusion, and desperate hope. Parents on land tried to stay calm for their children, telling them to listen to instructions, to stay safe, to wait for rescue. None of them fully understood how bad the situation truly was. One of those parents was Yu Ansil, the mother of a student named Yu Miji. Like many others, she received a call from her child during the disaster. In that moment, she did what countless parents would do. She told her daughter to follow the teacher's guidance. She believed that the adults in charge knew what they were doing. She believed that staying calm and listening would keep her child safe. Later, Yu Ansil would speak about that phone call with deep regret. Her words carry the weight of a decision made without full knowledge, a decision that no parent should ever have to live with. She said that she should have told her daughter to escape quickly. She should have told her to get out, to run, to ignore instructions if necessary. But she didn't know the true situation. From where she stood, far away and relying on limited information, she believed her advice was the safest thing to give. That regret is something no time can erase. It represents the cruel reality of disasters like this one, where ordinary people are forced to make life or death decisions without understanding the full picture. Parents trusted teachers, teachers trusted the crew, passengers trusted the captain, and that chain of trust failed in the most devastating way possible. As the ferry sank, the chances of survival grew smaller. The inside of the ship became dark and disorienting. Water rushed in. Hallways that once echoed with laughter and conversation turned into deadly traps. Many passengers never made it out of their cabins. They were trapped by rising water, by locked doors, by the simple fact that they had waited too long because they were told to wait. By the time the ferry fully sank, 304 people had lost their lives. Most of them were students, young people with futures that would never happen. Lives that ended not because of a sudden, unavoidable accident, but because of human failure, poor decisions, and a lack of responsibility at the highest levels. The aftermath of the disaster shook the entire country. Anger spread quickly as details emerged. People wanted to know how something like this could happen. How could a captain abandon his ship while passengers remained on board? How could rescue efforts be so slow and disorganized? How could so many warnings and chances to act be ignored? Investigations followed. The captain and 14 other crew members were eventually convicted on charges related to the sinking. Their actions, or lack of action, were examined in court and in the public eye. For many families, these convictions brought little comfort. No sentence could bring back their children. No punishment could undo the pain of unanswered phone calls, and empty bedrooms. For the families of the victims, life was permanently divided into before and after. Before the ferry, there was normal life, school schedules, family dinners, and future plans. After the ferry, there was grief, anger, and a constant sense of loss. Parents attended memorials instead of graduations. They held photos instead of their children. They asked questions that would never have satisfying answers. The story of Yu Unsil and her daughter became one of the most heartbreaking examples of the tragedy. Her regret is shared by many parents who gave similar advice that day. They trusted the system. They trusted the people in charge. They trusted that doing the right thing would protect their children. Instead, that trust became a source of lifelong pain. What makes this tragedy especially difficult to accept is that it was not caused by a single, unavoidable event. It was a series of failures. Failures in safety regulations, failures in leadership, failures in emergency response, and perhaps most painfully, failures in moral responsibility. The people who were supposed to protect the passengers chose to protect themselves instead. In the years since the sinking, documentaries have been made to tell the story, to preserve the memories of those who were lost, and to remind the world of what happened. These documentaries are difficult to watch. They show footage of the ferry tilting, of families waiting on shore, of parents receiving the worst news imaginable. They include interviews with survivors, rescuers, and grieving families. They force viewers to confront uncomfortable truths about authority, responsibility, and trust. For many people, watching these documentaries brings a deep sense of sadness and anger. It raises questions about how society treats safety, how institutions respond to emergencies, and how easily people can be failed by systems they are taught to rely on. It also highlights the quiet heroism of those who tried to help, even when the official response fell short. The sinking of the ferry remains a symbol of national trauma in South Korea. It is remembered not just as an accident, but as a lesson written in loss. Schools, families, and communities continue to talk about it, not because they want to relive the pain, but because they want to prevent something like it from happening again. For the families of the 304 people who died, remembrance is both a duty and a burden. They carry the stories of their children, their siblings, their loved ones. They speak their names. They demand accountability. And they live with the knowledge that their lives were forever changed by a series of decisions made in moments of fear and selfishness. This tragedy reminds us that in emergencies, words matter, instructions matter, leadership matters. Telling people to stay calm and wait can be deadly if it is not backed by action and truth. Trust, once broken in such a profound way, is incredibly hard to rebuild. Above all, the sinking of the ferry is a story about ordinary people placed in an extraordinary and terrifying situation. It is about students who did what they were told, parents who gave advice based on trust, and a system that failed them when they needed it most. The loss of 304 lives is not just a statistic. It is 304 unfinished stories, 304 empty seats, and 304 reminders of what happens when responsibility is abandoned. The memory of that day continues to live on, not only in documentaries and court records, but in the hearts of those who remember, who mourn, and who refuse to let the lessons of that tragedy be forgotten. I grew up in a place so small and quiet that most people have never heard of it, and the ones who have usually picture something harmless and old-fashioned. My hometown is Lititz, the kind of place people associate with Amish buggies on back roads, craft fairs on the weekends, and historic buildings everyone treats like sacred objects. It's the kind of town where real crime feels almost impossible. where the biggest scandal people talk about for years is someone spray painting a statue or knocking over a mailbox. Nothing truly bad is supposed to happen there. That's why what happened still feels unreal to me, even now. At the time, I was a teenager, living with my family just a street or two away from where everything unfolded. Life followed a predictable rhythm. You recognized almost every face at the grocery store. News traveled fast, but it was usually boring news. Who got engaged? Who moved away? Who was mad about a zoning change? Violence was something that happened in cities far away from places like ours. There were two kids in town who were dating. Everyone knew who they were, or at least knew of them. Both were homeschooled and raised in very strict evangelical Christian households. I'm not saying that as a judgment, just as context, because in a town like ours, those details matter. People knew which families went to which churches. They knew who homeschooled and who didn't. It all fed into how people talked, how they whispered, how they formed opinions. The boy was 18. The girl was 14. Even in a conservative town, that age gap made people uncomfortable once it became known. At first, though, it wasn't widely discussed. Rumors existed, but nothing was confirmed publicly. Eventually, it came out that the two were not just dating in the innocent sense. They were in a sexual relationship. When the girl's parents found out, everything changed. Her parents decided to confront him directly. They called him and told him to come over to their house so they could talk. In their minds, it was probably going to be a tense conversation, maybe an argument, maybe a threat to go to the police, maybe a demand that he stay away from their daughter forever. In a town like Littitz, that's how people think conflicts end, with yelling, with shame, with someone being told to leave and never come back. What many news articles later glossed over or barely mentioned at all was how he showed up that night. According to reports and what later came out, he arrived at their front door carrying a canvas bag filled with guns. Not one gun, multiple. The father noticed immediately. He saw the bag, understood what it was, and told the kid to go put the guns away before they talked. And incredibly, the boy did. He went and put the bag away, then came back inside. That detail has always stuck with me. The idea that there was a moment where this could have gone differently. A moment where someone saw danger, acknowledged it, and still believed things could be handled calmly. It shows how deeply people in that town believed in reason, in conversation, in the idea that nothing truly horrific could happen in their living room. They sat down and talked, or argued. No one knows exactly what was said, only that it went on for a while. Voices were raised, emotions were high, the parents were angry, protective, probably terrified. The boy was defensive, emotional, and clearly unstable. Eventually, the conversation reached a breaking point. The parents told him to leave. That's when everything shattered. He stood up and, within seconds, pulled out a gun and shot both parents in the head. They were standing within 6 feet of each other. There was no struggle, no warning, just sudden, brutal violence. The kind of violence that doesn't belong in a place like Littitz, the kind that feels like it was dropped in from another world. One of the younger daughters saw it happen. That fact alone is hard to process. A child, witnessing her parents being executed in their own home by someone they had invited inside. That image is something no one should ever carry, especially not a kid. After killing them, he didn't immediately flee alone. The 14-year-old girl went with him willingly. That's another part people struggle to understand. She believed they were going to start a new life together. She believed, somehow, that this was the beginning of something, not the end of everything. Whether that belief came from manipulation, fear, love, or shock is impossible to say, but she got into the car with him and left. They made it as far as Indiana. Somewhere along the way, reality caught up with them. He crashed the car. That's when everything finally collapsed. Police became involved. The story exploded beyond the town. National headlines followed. Suddenly, Lidditz was being talked about on the news for something other than pretzels and tourism. For people outside the town, it was a shocking story. For people inside it, it was something else entirely. It felt like the ground had shifted, like the rules we all believed in no longer applied. If something like that could happen here, then nowhere was truly safe. What made it even more disturbing for me personally was how close it all was. This didn't happen across town or in some distant neighborhood I'd never been to. It happened the next street over from my house, close enough that I could walk there in minutes, close enough that I had passed that house countless times without ever thinking twice about it. That night, I wasn't even home. I was staying at a friend's place. I went to sleep without knowing anything was wrong. No sirens woke me, no shouting, just a normal night, or so it seemed. When I woke up the next morning, my phone was full of voicemails and missed calls. People I knew, people I barely knew, people asking the same question over and over. Are you okay? Is your family safe? Do you know what happened? At first, I didn't understand why anyone was calling me. Then the messages started making sense. People didn't know exactly where it had happened yet. They just knew something terrible had occurred nearby. They were checking on each other, trying to make sure no one they loved was involved. That's when it hit me how fragile everything really was. How easily it could have been someone else's house. How easily it could have been my family. One wrong address, one different decision, and my life would have been split into before and after, just like theirs. In the days that followed, the town felt different, quieter, heavier. People spoke in hushed voices at stores. Church services were packed, not with joy, but with fear and grief. Parents held their kids a little tighter. Everyone locked their doors more carefully, even though they'd never really felt the need to before. There was also a strange sense of disbelief. People kept saying things like, "This doesn't happen here," as if repeating it might undo what had already happened. But it had happened, and it wasn't going away. What scared me most wasn't just the violence. It was how normal everything looked on the outside. A quiet street, a family home, a conversation that started the way so many confrontations start. There were no obvious warning signs to the outside world. No dramatic buildup, just a series of choices that ended in irreversible loss. Even now, when I think back on it, I remember how vulnerable I felt afterward. Walking around town no longer felt the same. Familiar places felt slightly wrong, like sets from a play where something terrible had happened backstage. Every time I passed that street, I thought about how close I had been without knowing it. That night taught me something I never wanted to learn. Evil doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it walks up to the door carrying a bag and waits politely to be invited inside. Sometimes it looks like a kid you've seen around town. Sometimes it hides behind the assumption that people like us don't do things like that. Lidditz went back to being Lidditz eventually. Tourists returned. Craft fairs continued. Life moved on, at least on the surface. But for those of us who lived there at the time, there's a quiet line running through our memories, a reminder that even the safest seeming places can be shattered in an instant. And every time I think about waking up to those voicemails, about people asking if my family was okay, I realize how close we all were to being part of that story in a much worse way. That's what still unsettles me the most. Not just what happened, but how easily it could have happened to anyone else. I was around 13 or 14 when this happened, old enough to be allowed out at night with friends, but still young enough that everything felt bigger, stranger, and more intense than it probably would now. It was one of those nights that seemed completely ordinary at the time. The kind you don't think twice about until years later, when a single memory refuses to fade, no matter how much you try to explain it away. A few friends and I were having a sleepover. Nothing special, just hanging out, talking, playing games, doing the usual stuff kids do when they're trying to stay awake as long as possible. At some point, we realized we were hungry and decided we wanted snacks. It was probably around 10 at night, maybe a little later. I remember it being either fall or winter because it was already completely dark outside. The kind of dark where streetlights feel farther apart and shadows seem deeper. There were 3 of us originally. One of my friends was disabled and really uncomfortable being out at night, especially walking around in the dark. He didn't want to come with us, and we didn't push him. We figured it would be quick anyway. So it ended up just being me and one other friend heading out on foot to the dollar store nearby. The walk itself wasn't anything unusual. We lived in a pretty quiet area, mostly neighborhoods filled with older people. By that time of night, almost every house was dark. No cars passing, no people outside, just streetlights, sidewalks, and silence. The kind of silence that makes your footsteps sound louder than they really are. About halfway to the store, we reached this long stretch of road. It wasn't a main road, just a straight residential one that felt longer than the others for some reason. At the very end of it, in front of one of the houses, there was something that immediately caught my attention. At first, my brain didn't know what to do with it. It was big, way too big to ignore. I remember stopping, without even realizing I had stopped. It looked humanoid, but not in a normal way. The proportions were wrong. The arms and legs were long, unnaturally long, like they didn't quite belong to the body they were attached to. The head was huge and round, far too big compared to the rest of it. The color was this pale, sickly white that stood out against the darkness around it. What really messed with my sense of scale was how tall it was. It was crouched down, but even like that, it looked almost as tall as the house behind it. Not a small house either, a normal 2-story suburban home. My brain kept trying to tell me it had to be something else. A decoration, a vehicle, some weird art installation, anything that made sense. But nothing really fit. I stood there staring at it, trying to process what I was seeing. I probably would have convinced myself it was nothing if I hadn't said anything, but I did. I asked my friend if she could see it too. She stopped and looked. The moment she focused on it, something changed. It looked like the thing lifted its head, not fast, not dramatically, just enough movement to be unmistakable, enough to confirm that whatever it wasn't just an object sitting there. That was when the fear hit. I felt it in my chest first, that sudden tight feeling when your body realizes something is wrong before your mind fully catches up. My friend grabbed my arm immediately. She was scared, visibly shaken, and she didn't want to stand there any longer. She kept tugging on me, whispering that we needed to keep moving, that we needed to leave. Part of me, for reasons I still don't fully understand, wanted to go closer, curiosity mixed with disbelief. I wanted answers. I wanted to know what it was. I wanted to prove to myself that there was a logical explanation. But she was genuinely freaked out, and that mattered more. So we kept walking. We didn't look back. The rest of the walk to the store felt tense. We didn't talk much. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow felt like it was watching us. When we finally reached the dollar store, we realized we were too late. The lights were off. The doors were locked. We had wasted too much time standing there on that road. So we turned around and started walking back. That's when the unease really set in. I couldn't stop thinking about what we had seen. It replayed in my mind over and over. The shape, the size, the way it moved its head. I kept telling myself that when we passed by again, I'd get a better look, that I'd figure it out, that it would turn out to be something normal and I'd feel stupid for ever being scared. As we got closer to that long road again, I made up my mind. I told myself that if my friend didn't want to stop, I would. With or without her, I was going to look. But when we reached the spot, there was nothing there. The house looked normal. The yard was empty. No massive white shape, no crouched figure, nothing. That was somehow worse. If it had still been there, I might have convinced myself it was a statue or some elaborate prank. But it being gone meant it had either moved or had never been there at all. And neither of those options felt comforting. We didn't slow down this time. We ran. We ran the rest of the way home without stopping, our footsteps pounding against the pavement, breath coming out in sharp bursts. I don't remember saying much during that run. Fear doesn't always come with words. Sometimes it's just motion, just the need to get somewhere safe as fast as possible. When we finally got back to the house, we slammed the door behind us and locked it. Only then did we start talking over each other, trying to make sense of what we had seen. Our other friend, the one who stayed behind, listened wide-eyed as we explained it. He was glad he hadn't come with us. We didn't sleep much that night. Years have passed since then, and I've never seen anything like it again. I still think about it sometimes, especially when I'm walking at night or driving through quiet neighborhoods. I live in Idaho, and over the years I've heard plenty of stories from other people who claim to have seen similar things. Tall, pale, humanoid figures, creatures with long limbs and strange movements. Some people talk about things like the rake, and I don't know. Maybe. I'm not saying that's what it was. I honestly don't know what it was. I've tried to come up with explanations. Maybe it was some kind of display. Maybe it was machinery. Maybe it was just my imagination filling in gaps because it was dark and I was young, but none of those explanations fully work. Heavy machinery doesn't just disappear without a trace. Displays don't usually move their heads. And my imagination didn't invent something my friend also saw. What sticks with me the most isn't the fear, but the uncertainty, the lack of closure, the fact that I never got answers. And probably never will. It's one of those experiences that sits in the back of your mind, quietly reminding you that there are things you don't understand and maybe aren't meant to. I don't lose sleep over it. It doesn't haunt me. But every once in a while, when someone brings up strange sightings or unexplained encounters, I think back to that long road, that silent neighborhood, and that massive pale shape crouched in front of a house. It might have been nothing, or it might not have been. Either way, it makes for one hell of a story. Have any of you ever seen something you just couldn't explain? Like not a ghost story, but something physically there that made zero sense? I'm starting to think these things are way more common than we admit. Share yours if you've got one. This is a story my father used to tell me when I was a teenager, and the way he told it always stuck with me. It wasn't dramatic or sensationalized. He told it in a quiet, serious tone, the kind that lets you know he isn't trying to scare you for fun. He was telling it because it was real, because it happened close to home, and because it showed how dark things could get in a place that already struggled with a lot of problems. So I'll tell it the way he told it to me. In 1989, this happened in Gillette, my hometown. Gillette has always had a complicated reputation. On the surface, it looks like a normal working town, built around energy jobs and industry. But for a long time, it also had a serious methamphetamine problem. People didn't always talk about it openly, but everyone knew it was there. Addiction, mental illness, and violence weren't rare the way they should have been. There was a woman named Laura Lee Rice. According to my father, she was heavily involved with meth at the time, though later she would be diagnosed as schizophrenic. Whether the drugs made her illness worse or simply existed alongside it, no one could really say for sure. What mattered was that she was deeply unwell, living inside a reality that no one else could see or understand. At some point, she began having severe hallucinations. In her mind, she was being visited by Medusa, not the mythological figure as a story or symbol, but as something real and commanding. Medusa, in her hallucinations, told her that her children were not actually her children. She believed they were evil clones, replacements that had been put there to deceive her. The real children, she believed, had been taken. She had 2 daughters. One was only 4 months old. The other was 15 months old. Babies, completely helpless. According to what my father said, Laura believed that if she followed Medusa's instructions, her real children would be returned to her. She believed this completely. There was no doubt in her mind. To her, it wasn't murder. It was a twisted kind of rescue mission. What happened next is almost impossible to understand unless you accept that she was not living in reality anymore. She killed both children and dismembered them. My father never went into graphic detail, and I won't either. He didn't need to. The horror of it didn't come from gore, but from the fact that it was done to babies by their own mother, driven by delusions she believed were absolutely real. Afterward, she placed the bodies, heads, and arms into different sacks. She separated them deliberately, believing this was part of what Medusa demanded. One of the most disturbing parts of the story is what she did next. She put the heads into the trunk of the children's father's vehicle. He didn't know. According to my father, the father was completely unaware of what had happened or what was in his car. The rest of the remains were placed elsewhere, hidden in different locations. In her mind, this was all part of a ritual. She believed that by doing this, Medusa would bring her real children back to her. She wasn't trying to hide what she had done in the way criminals usually do. She believed she was following instructions from something powerful and real. When the truth came out, the town was shaken. Gillette wasn't a huge place, and news like that spread fast. People didn't want to believe it at first. Stories like that feel unreal when they happen close to home. They feel like something that belongs in headlines from far away, not in a place where you recognize faces at the grocery store. Eventually, Laura Lee Rice was diagnosed with schizophrenia. The case became an example of what can happen when severe mental illness goes untreated, especially when combined with drug abuse. There was no simple explanation that made it easier to accept. Drugs alone didn't explain it. Mental illness alone didn't explain it. It was the combination, the perfect storm of a broken mind, addiction, and a lack of intervention. When my father told me this story, he wasn't trying to shock me. He wasn't telling it as entertainment. He told it as a warning, in a way, about how fragile the human mind can be, about how dangerous untreated mental illness is, about how drugs like meth don't just destroy the person using them, but can destroy everyone around them. What stayed with me most wasn't the violence itself. It was the sadness of it. The idea that someone could be so disconnected from reality that they believed they were saving their children by killing them. That a mother could be convinced that her own babies were evil copies. That her mind could twist love into something unrecognizable and catastrophic. It also changed the way I thought about my hometown. Growing up, you tend to think of your town as safe, simply because it's familiar. Hearing that story made me realize that darkness doesn't care about population size or geography. It can exist anywhere, quietly, behind closed doors, until one day it erupts in a way no one can ignore. Even now, years later, I think about how my father told it. Calmly, seriously, like a man who had seen enough to know that real horror isn't supernatural. It doesn't come from monsters or myths, even if someone believes it does. It comes from the human mind breaking in the worst possible way. It's not a story I tell lightly. It's not one I enjoy remembering. but it's one that stays with you because it's real and because it shows how terrifying reality can be when someone loses their grip on it completely. If you're still here, it means these stories didn't just pass through you, they stayed. Every story you heard tonight was real. Real people, real moments, and in every one of them, something went wrong, or almost did. If you want to keep exploring the stories that don't let go so easily, subscribe to Shadow Archives, because there are more stories waiting, and not all of them end before it's too late.